In the winter of 2024, and again through the spring of 2025, interior ministers in 4 European capitals stood before television cameras and announced strikingly similar plans. Paris unveiled new powers to dissolve Islamist associations receiving public funds. Copenhagen expanded its list of banned foreign preachers barred from Danish mosques. Vienna's documentation center, Political Islam, published fresh findings tracing Muslim Brotherhood networks across 3 countries. Berlin's Domestic Intelligence Service issued updated warnings about DİTİB, the Turkish federation overseeing more than 900 mosques. 4 governments, 4 separate parliaments, 4 distinct legal traditions built across centuries. Yet the language emerging from each podium sounded remarkably alike. Foreign funding, parallel societies, political Islam, Republican values, democratic order, national security. Was this coincidence or coordination? No European Union treaty binds France, Denmark, Austria, and Germany to a shared counter-extremism policy. No Brussels directive dictates how Vienna licenses imams, how Copenhagen caps foreign donations at 44,000 euros, or how Berlin's 16 federal states handle mosque oversight. And yet, within an 18-month window, all 4 states tightened rules on religious financing. All 4 expanded surveillance of Muslim Brotherhood-linked organizations, and all 4 passed or reinforced measures explicitly targeting what officials now call political Islam, a phrase barely used in mainstream European politics a decade earlier. This documentary asks a single question and spends the following chapters testing it from every angle available. Are France's Separatism Law, Austria's Islam Gesetz, Denmark's Ghetto Package, and Germany's Constitutional Protection Offices converging into something resembling a coordinated European strategy? Or are 4 nations, each shaped by its own history of colonial ties, wartime occupation, imperial concordats, and federal structures, independently arriving at similar-sounding laws for entirely different domestic reasons? The answer matters far beyond legal technicality. It determines whether Muslim communities across the continent now face one unified regulatory regime, or 4 incompatible legal architectures wearing the same rhetorical mask. To understand which is true, we begin where the strictest and oldest of these frameworks was written. Not in Vienna, not in Copenhagen, but inside a French republic built on a principle 2 centuries older than political Islam itself, laïcité. On August 24, 2021, France's parliament passed the Loi confortant Le Respect des Principes de la République, the Separatism Law, after 18 months of debate following the murder of teacher Samuel Paty. The statute forces every association receiving public subsidies to sign a contract of Republican values, a legal pledge that organizations will not challenge secularism, gender equality, or the authority of French law. Refuse to sign or breach the pledge afterward, and public funding disappears immediately, along with tax-exempt status. The law's teeth extend further than funding contracts. It grants the Interior Ministry expanded authority to dissolve associations administratively without waiting for a criminal conviction. In late 2020, before the law even passed, France used comparable emergency powers to dissolve the Collective Against Islamophobia in France, known as CCIF, and Baraka City, a humanitarian charity accused of financing extremist networks abroad. Both organizations denied the allegations and relocated operations outside French territory, but their French assets and legal existence ended by government decree. Beyond associations, the law reaches into private life. Homeschooling, once broadly permitted, becomes restricted to specific medical or logistical exceptions, with authorities citing concern that unregulated home education enables ideological indoctrination outside state curriculum oversight. Foreign training of imams inside French territory faces new restrictions too. Religious leaders must increasingly complete civic training in French institutions covering secularism, French law, and Republican values before leading congregations. Critics, including the French National Human Rights Commission, warned the law's broad definitions of threatening Republican values risk sweeping ordinary religious practice into state suspicion. Supporters counter that transparency requirements simply align religious associations with the same disclosure rules already applied to other publicly funded organizations. Either way, France's approach rests on a foundational premise. Unlike anything in Vienna, Copenhagen, or Berlin, religion, under laïcité, has no claim to public space or public money without submitting entirely to state-defined civic terms. That premise, radical in its rigidity, would soon find an unlikely echo 600 kilometers east. Not through French-style secularism, but through an Austrian law that instead recognizes Islam formally as a legal religion while banning something else entirely, the money crossing its borders. Vienna took a different path entirely. In February 2015, Austria's parliament passed an amended Islam Gesetz, the Islam Law, updating a legal framework for recognizing Muslim communities that dated back to 1912, when the Habsburg Empire first granted Islam official religious status after annexing Bosnia-Herzegovina. Unlike France's separation of religion from public life, Austria's model formally recognizes Islam as a legal religious community with rights to religious education in schools and state-registered clergy. The 2015 revision, however, added a sharp restriction. Foreign funding of mosques and imam salaries became illegal. Under the new provisions, Muslim organizations operating in Austria must finance mosque construction, staff salaries, and religious programming entirely through domestic sources. Membership dues, local donations, and property income generated inside Austrian borders. Foreign governments, including Turkey and Gulf states, could no longer directly fund imam positions or subsidize mosque operations, a rule aimed squarely at severing financial dependency on organizations like Turkey's Diyanet or Muslim Brotherhood-linked foundations abroad. Enforcement expanded further in 2020, when Vienna's government established the Documentation Center Political Islam, a state-funded research body tasked with mapping organizational networks, financial links, and ideological materials connected to political Islam across Austria and neighboring countries. The center has since published detailed reports naming specific Muslim Brotherhood-affiliated umbrella groups, and its methodology has been directly cited by officials in Germany and France as a template worth replicating. Austria's approach produced immediate friction. In 2018, the government closed 7 mosques and expelled several Turkish-funded imams under the law's provisions, prompting Ankara to formally protest what it called discriminatory treatment of its diaspora communities. Austrian courts have since upheld the core funding ban, though legal challenges continue over its practical enforcement against smaller congregations. What makes Austria's model distinct isn't secularism, it's the opposite. Islam remains legally recognized, protected, and entitled to state benefits unavailable in France. Yet financially, Vienna has drawn a harder line than Paris ever attempted. 600 kilometers north, a smaller country with no concordat, no colonial history with Muslim populations, and a very different justification, was drawing its own line. This time around, language itself. Denmark's approach began not with religion, but with geography. In 2018, Copenhagen's parliament passed what became known internationally as the Ghetto Package, a set of laws targeting residential areas classified by government criteria involving income, education levels, crime rates, and the proportion of residents from non-Western backgrounds. Areas meeting multiple criteria for 4 consecutive years faced mandatory redevelopment plans, including partial demolition of public housing, aimed at reducing concentrations of what officials termed parallel societies operating outside mainstream Danish institutions. Religious regulation followed a similar cultural integration logic. Denmark's imam rules, tightened progressively since 2016, require that Friday sermons delivered to non-Danish-speaking congregations be conducted in Danish or accompanied by Danish translation, when religious leaders cannot demonstrate adequate integration into Danish civic life. The Ministry of Immigration and Integration also maintains and publishes a formal list of foreign preachers banned from entering Denmark, citing extremist statements made abroad. A list that by 2023 included clerics from Sweden, the United Kingdom, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia. Financially, Denmark drew its own boundary in 2021. Religious communities, including mosques, churches, and other congregations, became subject to a foreign donation cap of roughly 44,000 euros per year from any single foreign source without prior government disclosure and review. Donations exceeding that threshold require registration with Danish tax authorities and can trigger formal investigation into the donor organization's affiliations and intentions. Unlike France's insistence on strict religious neutrality or Austria's formal religious recognition, Denmark's framework rests on assimilation as civic obligation. The expectation that residents, regardless of religion, integrate linguistically and culturally into a specifically Danish social model. Critics, including the Council of Europe's Human Rights Commissioner, have questioned whether targeting neighborhoods by demographic composition constitutes indirect ethnic discrimination rather than legitimate urban policy. Copenhagen's justification differs from Vienna's and Paris's in another key respect. Denmark has no written constitution guaranteeing religious freedom in the same explicit terms as its neighbors, giving Parliament wider latitude to legislate cultural conformity directly. 900 kilometers south, Germany would take yet another approach entirely, one built not on new legislation, but on quiet, decades-old intelligence infrastructure. Germany has passed no single national Islam law. Instead, its response runs through an institution built for an entirely different purpose 70 years earlier. The Bundesamt für Verfassungsschutz, the Federal Office for the Protection of the Constitution, originally established in 1950 to monitor threats to Germany's post-war democratic order, including neo-Nazi movements and Soviet-linked communist organizations. That same agency now formally monitors the Muslim Brotherhood as an extremist organization under domestic surveillance, tracking its affiliated cultural centers, student associations, and mosque networks across German states. DİTİB, the Turkish Islamic Union for Religious Affairs, has faced particular scrutiny. Overseeing more than 900 mosques across Germany and functioning as an extension of Turkey's state religious authority, Diyanet, DİTİB, came under formal investigation after 2016, when several of its imams were found reporting on Erdogan critics within German-Turkish communities directly back to Ankara. German prosecutors opened criminal inquiries into individual imams for espionage-related activity, though DİTİB's organizational structure itself remains legally intact. Enforcement in Germany happens locally rather than nationally. Individual mosques tied to extremist preaching have been closed by city and state authorities. Berlin closed the Fusselet Mosque in 2017, linked to an attacker involved in the Christmas market truck attack that killed 12 people the previous year. But such closures happen state by state, city by city, under Germany's federal system, which grants each of the country's 16 states significant authority over religious and cultural affairs. This fragmentation is deliberate, rooted in German constitutional history. After 1945, framers of the Basic Law distributed power away from centralized authority precisely to prevent any future concentration resembling the Nazi state. The result: unlike Austria's Islam Gesetz or France's Separatism Law, Germany has no equivalent single statute governing mosque financing, imam training, or foreign funding nationwide. Only intelligence monitoring, scattered state regulations, and case-by-case local closures. 4 countries, 4 different starting points: religious neutrality, religious recognition, cultural assimilation, and federal intelligence monitoring. Yet strip away the constitutional language, and the same words keep resurfacing in every capital: foreign funding, transparency, disclosure. It's time to examine exactly where these 4 separate legal roads actually intersect. 4 capitals, 4 parliaments, 1 recurring word: transparency. By 2025, France, Denmark, Austria, and Germany all require religious organizations to disclose foreign funding sources, a convergence that looked accidental in 2015 and looks deliberate by 2024. Vienna's Islam Gesetz, now a decade old, forced Muslim communities to prove domestic financing or lose recognition. Copenhagen's donation cap, set near 44,000 euros annually, functions on the same logic. Money from Ankara, Riyadh, or Doha becomes visible, traceable, reportable. Berlin's Verfassungsschutz, in its 2023 annual report, named the Muslim Brotherhood as an object of formal observation, listing organizational names that also appear in Vienna's Documentation Center Political Islam Archives. Paris's 2021 law demanding a contract of Republican values produced the same effect through a different mechanism. Associations receiving state subsidies must certify they receive no incompatible foreign influence. The overlap runs deeper than shared vocabulary. Investigators in Vienna and intelligence analysts in Berlin have cited overlapping umbrella structures, organizations with different national names but shared leadership circles traced back to Muslim Brotherhood-linked networks active since the 1960s in Western Europe. A Documentation Center report from 2022 named organizations operating in 4 countries under 4 separate legal labels. German domestic intelligence flagged several of the same names 1 year later. France's dissolution of CCIF in 2020 removed one node from a network that Austrian and German researchers say still operates under new acronyms elsewhere. None of this required a treaty. No Brussels directive orders member states to track imam funding or catalog Brotherhood-linked charities. Yet 4 governments arrived, independently, at nearly identical demands: show us the money, name the funders, disclose the network. That convergence raises the central question of this film. Is this coordination, quiet and informal, passed between intelligence services and ministries through shared briefings? Or is it 4 separate nations discovering, independently, that the same transnational organizations operate inside their borders, forcing structurally similar responses? The word transparency masks that ambiguity. Because beneath the shared vocabulary sit 4 legal systems that treat religion, state, and citizenship in fundamentally incompatible ways. And that is where the apparent unity begins to fracture. That fracture becomes visible the moment you compare the 4 constitutions underneath the shared language. Four countries, 4 incompatible foundations. France's laicite, codified in the 1905 law separating church and state, treats religion as a private matter that has no place in public institutions, schools, or civil service. Under this framework, the 2021 Separatism Law doesn't target Islam by name. It targets any organization whose activities threaten Republican principles, a category broad enough to include Catholic schools and Islamist mosques alike, though in practice enforcement has concentrated overwhelmingly on Muslim organizations. Denmark operates from a completely different premise. There is no strict church-state wall. The Evangelical Lutheran Church remains a state church under the 1849 Constitution. Denmark's approach to political Islam is not built on separation, but on assimilation, on the explicit expectation that residents adopt Danish language, Danish civic norms, and Danish social patterns. The 2018 Ghetto Package, targeting residential areas with high proportions of non-Western residents, treated cultural distance itself as the underlying problem, mandating daycare from age 1 and defining 28 areas nationally by income, employment, and education thresholds tied to ethnic composition. Austria inherited something neither France nor Denmark has, a formal concordat. The 1912 Islam Gesetz, updated in 2015, recognizes Islam as an officially established religious community with legal status dating back to the Austro-Hungarian Empire's annexation of Bosnia. That century-old recognition is precisely why Vienna could legislate imam funding and mosque financing directly. Austria already possessed the legal category recognized religious community that France's laicite explicitly refuses to create. Germany diverges hardest of all. There is no national Islam law, no single ministry with authority, because Germany's basic law assigns religious and cultural policy to its 16 federal states, the Länder. Bavaria's approach to Dittib mosques differs from North Rhine-Westphalia's, which differs again from Berlin's own municipal closures. What Paris legislates nationally in one statute, Germany must negotiate 16 times over. 4 governments say transparency, integration, security. None of them mean the same legal thing by those words, because none of them built their state from the same historical starting point. And that mismatch is exactly what Europe's courts, from Strasbourg to Luxembourg, have begun to test. Legal architecture built on different foundations produces different vulnerabilities, and both France and Austria have already faced their laws in court. The European Court of Human Rights, seated in Strasbourg, has received challenges to France's 2021 Separatism Law and Austria's Islamgesetz funding ban, both tested against Article 9 of the European Convention on Human Rights, the article guaranteeing freedom of thought. conscience, and religion. The France case centers partly on the 2020 dissolution of CCIF, the Collective Against Islamophobia in France, and Baraka City, both shut down by executive decree under emergency powers rather than ordinary judicial process. Applicants argued that dissolution without full judicial review, justified by alleged links to extremism that were never proven in open criminal court, violated both Article 9 and Article 11's protection of freedom of association. French courts upheld the dissolutions domestically in 2020 and 2021, but the Strasbourg complaints remain a live test of whether administrative dissolution meets convention standards. Austria's case is narrower but sharper. Does banning foreign funding for imam salaries discriminate specifically against Muslim communities while leaving other recognized religions untouched by comparable restrictions? Critics point out that the 2015 Islamgesetz applies financial constraints to Islam that Austria's Catholic or Protestant institutions never face, despite Article 14's prohibition on discriminatory application of convention rights. Amnesty International, in reports published across 2021 and 2022, went further, arguing that both laws risk what it calls collective punishment, measures framed around counter-extremism that fall on ordinary mosques, Islamic schools, and charitable associations with no proven connection to violence. Human Rights Watch raised similar concerns about Denmark's imam language requirements, arguing sermon language mandates burden religious practice without demonstrated security benefit. None of these challenges has yet produced a Grand Chamber ruling striking down a national law outright. But the pattern itself matters. Courts are being asked, case by case, country by country, whether transparency and counter-extremism function as neutral legal categories or as cover for targeting one religion specifically. The answer Strasbourg eventually gives won't just judge one country's statute. It will test whether 4 separate national experiments can survive under a single European human rights framework at all. That test is still pending. There is no treaty. Search the Lisbon Treaty, the Charter of Fundamental Rights, any binding EU directive, and you will not find a shared European policy on political Islam. What exists instead is 4 national parliaments, each responding to its own domestic pressure, each producing legislation that resembles the others without ever being coordinated by Brussels. France's National Assembly passed its Separatism Law in July 2021 after the murder of teacher Samuel Paty. Austria's parliament passed its Islamgesetz in 2015 following years of debate about Turkish-funded imams inside Vienna's mosques. Denmark's Folketing built its ghetto package across successive governments from 2010 onward, driven by domestic anxiety over residential segregation. Germany's federal states each moved independently, since Berlin possesses no constitutional authority to legislate a single national Islam law at all. 4 separate triggers. 4 separate timelines, 4 separate legislative bodies, none of them bound by a shared European mandate, none of them required to consult the other 3 before acting. Yet the language keeps converging. Transparency, foreign funding, parallel societies, counter-radicalization. Ministers in Paris cite Vienna's documentation center. Austrian officials reference Germany's Verfassungsschutz reports. Danish policymakers point to French dissolutions as precedent. Informal coordination exists. Conference panels, shared intelligence briefings, cross-border research citations. But informal coordination is not a treaty, and shared vocabulary is not shared law. Underneath every ministerial statement about political Islam sits a different constitution. France's 1905 separation of church and state, Austria's 1912 Concordat recognizing Islam as an established religion, Denmark's constitutional state church dating to 1849, Germany's federal division of powers across 16 Länder, 4 histories of empire, occupation, migration, and reconstruction. 4 different threat assessments, from Denmark's residential segregation anxiety to France's post-attack security emergency, to Austria's century-old religious law, to Germany's decentralized patchwork of mosque oversight. Brussels never asked for unity, and none of these 4 governments built one. What looks, from a distance, like a united European front against political Islam is something narrower and more fragile. 4 nations, 4 parliaments, 4 legal traditions, arriving separately at the same words for different reasons. Same rhetoric, 4 different legal systems.